that regime, as everyone understood, was held together by corruption. The glue that kept people together was not loyalty to Maduro. It was the fact that these five guys had 5 separate oil fields that were assigned to them. These people had drug routes.
I understand that.
So that's going to be
I'm not defending the regime. In fact, I'm concerned that we haven't really changed the regime enough, and that America's dollars are still going to drug runners and to significant organizations who we don't want to have benefit from the funding that we're selling now of oil and providing to.
This exchange may look like a routine foreign policy clarification, but it's actually a public stress test of how far American oversight can stretch when strategic interests collide with ethical boundaries. What's really being tested here is whether U.S. financial controls can meaningfully restrain corruption while engaging unstable governments. This raises broader questions about how democracy safeguards its principles abroad when leverage is limited. In this video, we'll break down how sanctioned oil revenue, audits, and temporary arrangements reveal the limits of U.S. power and what that means for credibility on the global stage.
Thank you. I'm pleased that we are looking at a diplomatic presence in Venezuela in the near future. I think that's very important. But the DEA has reportedly identified Delcy Rodriguez as a significant actor in the drug trade. Do you agree with that? And if you do, how are we to assure the American people that the money that's going to Venezuela is not going to any of the cartels or drug running?
Yeah, and that, well, first of all, on the first point, I would say she's not indicted the way Maduro and his wife were. So I'm not going to speculate about newspaper articles and what law enforcement is working on. If, in fact, there were such an investigation, I mean, that's something that we would speculate on. Suffice it to say that this was not a normal system. We all should stipulate to that, okay? That regime, as everyone understood, was held together by corruption. The glue that kept people together was not loyalty to Maduro. It was the fact that these 5 guys had 5 separate oil fields that were assigned to them. These people had drug routes.
I understand that.
So that's going to be
I'm not defending the regime. In fact, I'm concerned that we haven't really changed the regime enough, and that America's dollars are still going to drug runners and to significant organizations who we don't want to have benefit from the funding that we're selling now of oil and providing to the Venezuelan government.
Look, I acknowledge that we are dealing with, I told you, with individuals that have been involved in things that in our system would not be acceptable to us in the long term. By no means is our policy to leave in place something permanent that's as corrupt as you've described. We are in the transition and stabilization phase. We are just acknowledging reality, and that is you have to work with the people that are in charge of the elements of government.
Okay, but
now, what are the
reassure people that money is not going continuing to go to the drug cartels?
Right. So that's the process that I outlined to you. So on the sanctioned oil, the oil that requires U.S. permission to move, that oil, the proceeds of that oil, which, by the way, is being sold at market price, not at the discount Venezuela was being forced to sell, is being deposited into an account that ultimately will become a U.S. Treasury blocked account here in the United States. They will submit, we will, at the front end, say this is what this money can be spent on these things. We will submit to them. They will submit to us a budget request. We want to use this money for these things. And part of the proceeds will go to fund a audit process to make sure that that's how the money is being spent. So and that's how we intend to handle those funds in the short term.
There's an actual audit process that's been set up? It
will be set up, and we have a couple options. One option is the Ex-Im Bank. They have expertise as bankers and being able to do some of that option. There may be some others in place. We haven't finalized what that audit process would be. We've only made one payment. And that payment we did, and retrospectively will be audited, but it was important we made that payment because they had to meet payroll. They had to keep sanitation workers, police officers, government workers on staff. It was a $300 million payment.
Right. So it's been reported that the oil sold for $500 million, that $300 million went to Venezuelan government. What happened to the other $200 million?
It's still sitting in the account, is my understanding at this time.
The account in Qatar?
Well, the account, yes, but that will ultimately be that's a short-term account. Ultimately, it will be a U.S. Treasury blocked account in the United States.
And will it also be audited?
Correct. Well, the audit will be on the expenditures. At the front end, we'll tell them this is what the money can be spent on. Again, I'm not talking about all the other revenues the Venezuelan government may have. We're talking about the revenues from the sanctioned oil. At the front end, we will say this is what the allowable expenses are. And then they will agree to fund, as part of the overall cost, they will pay for and fund an audit system acceptable to us to ensure that that's how the money was spent.
And can you report to this committee once that audit system is set up?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I'd like to change the topic in my short time that I have left, because when you were a member of this committee, you authored legislation to prevent President Trump from unilaterally leaving NATO, you and Senator Kaine. Do you still believe that the U.S. benefits from NATO?
We do. I mean, the problem but NATO needs to be reimagined as well in terms of the obligations. And this is not new to this president. Multiple presidents have complained about it.
I
think this president just complains about it louder than other presidents.
Well, I'm just trying to get a clear answer on where this administration stands relative to NATO, because it's been a very fuzzy message over the last year. And do you agree that we're stronger in confronting China when we do so with like-minded partners, and that China is still the number one threat that we face in the United States.
Yeah, but our like-minded partners have to have capability, and that's been part of the problem is the erosion in European defense capabilities because they've taken vast amount of the monies that these are rich countries, and because of the NATO umbrella, it gave them the flexibility to spend a tremendous amount of their revenues on social programs and not on defense. Now, maybe that trend line will begin to change.
Well, it's already begun to change, frankly, and thanks. And I think the president deserves credit for that, for the fact that there is now a commitment for 5% of GDP to be spent on defense. But part of that strength also comes not just from having the mechanism, the military might, but it also comes from the unity with our allies. And to the extent to which that unity is undermined, like the talk about Greenland and antagonizing Denmark, then it undermines NATO's ability. And the only people who are excited about that are Vladimir Putin and President Xi.
Yeah, well, I would say that I think our alliances in NATO ultimately are something that's going to work out. Our partners understand the importance of the U.S. presence in NATO. Without the U.S., there is no NATO. And we understand that in order for NATO to be stronger, our partners need to be stronger. And one of the things we've explained to our allies in NATO is the United States is not simply focused on Europe. We also have defense needs in the Western Hemisphere. We have defense needs in the Indo-Pacific. And it will require us. We may be the richest country in the world, but we don't have unlimited resources. And as we reassign
exactly why we want to have allies and partners to help us as we're looking at conflicts around the world. And when we antagonize our allies and partners, and when we send Canada to do a trade deal with China instead of coming to New Hampshire or the United States, it weakens our ability to confront our adversaries.
Yeah, but our allies have to be two things. They have to be willing to step up, but they also have to be capable of stepping up. And frankly, many of them have not. I mean, Spain is still not doing the 5%. I mean, there are countries that are still not doing. And in fact, Marco Rubio yesterday pointed out that without the United States, the countries of Europe would have to spend 10% of their GDP for the next 20 years to be able to make up the whole. So I do think there needs to be a rebalancing, and hopefully we'll have cooperation. I think we will. Rutte has done a great job of managing all
And I'm not arguing that point with you. As I said, I agree with what the president has asked of our European allies. What I'm arguing with you about is that his rhetoric is undermining NATO and our partnerships with our allies, and that's a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The moment lingered in the room after the exchange ended. Not because of a raised voice or a dramatic interruption, but because of what was quietly acknowledged in plain language. Senator Jeanne Shaheen pressed on a question that has followed American foreign policy for decades. When the United States unlocks financial pathways tied to unstable governments, who truly controls the outcome? And as Marco Rubio responded, outlining blocked accounts, audits, transitional phases, and managed expenditures, the hearing revealed something far more consequential than procedural details. It revealed how power operates when ideals collide with reality. This was not a conversation about abstract policy. It was a confrontation with the uncomfortable truth that American influence often functions inside imperfect systems. Rubio admitted it plainly. The structure the United States is dealing with is deeply flawed, held together not by shared values, but by control of resources. His defense was not moral clarity, but administrative containment. Funds are monitored, accounts are blocked, audits will be established. Oversight will follow. Yet the very need to explain these safeguards underscores the risk itself. When assurances must be repeated, it is because trust is already fragile. What unfolded here was a case study in modern governance. The United States, facing global instability, is forced to choose between disengagement and managed involvement. Rubio framed the approach as transitional, not an endorsement, not a permanent arrangement, but a necessary step to stabilize basic state functions: salaries, infrastructure, continuity. In that explanation lies the central tension of American leadership: maintaining influence without becoming complicit, acting decisively without surrendering moral authority. Shaheen's questioning cut through the technical language. Her focus was not on mechanisms, but on confidence. Whether the American public can reasonably believe that proceeds from sanctioned oil sales are insulated from misuse. The answer was careful, procedural, conditional. Money flows through accounts. Spending categories are approved in advance. Audits will review expenditures after the fact. And yet, even with these safeguards, the system depends on cooperation from actors whose legitimacy remains contested. That contradiction cannot be engineered away. This exchange matters because it exposes how foreign policy is often managed in the gray space between ideals and necessity. The United States claims to champion transparency, accountability, and democratic norms. But when faced with strategic pressure, energy markets, regional stability, geopolitical competition, those principles are tested. The administration's approach, as described here, reflects a belief that controlled engagement is preferable to isolation, that oversight can substitute for trust, that structure can compensate for uncertainty. The hearing also revealed something deeper about leadership. Rubio did not deny the flaws. He acknowledged them repeatedly. But acknowledgement is not resolution. It is a holding pattern. And in Washington, holding patterns have a way of becoming permanent fixtures. Temporary arrangements extend. Emergency measures normalize. Oversight becomes routine rather than exceptional. This is how power adapts, not through dramatic shifts, but through incremental acceptance. As the conversation moved toward NATO, the theme remained unchanged. Alliances, like financial arrangements, require balance. Rubio emphasized capability, the expectation that partners must contribute proportionally. Shaheen emphasized unity, the idea that strength comes not only from spending, but from trust and shared purpose. Here again, the fault line was visible. Strategic demands versus relational stability. Pressure versus cohesion. Results versus rhetoric. What this hearing ultimately showed is that American leadership today operates under constant strain. Strain between domestic accountability and international necessity. Between transparency and expedience. Between values and leverage. The system is built to manage these tensions, but not to resolve them cleanly. And that is what makes oversight hearings like this essential. Not because they offer simple answers, but because they force these contradictions into the open. The American public deserves more than reassurances. It deserves clarity about the trade-offs being made in its name. When money moves, when alliances shift, when temporary measures become policy, these decisions shape the country's moral standing as much as its strategic position. Oversight is not a formality. It is the last line between pragmatic governance and quiet erosion of principle. This moment in the hearing was not dramatic by television standards, but it was consequential. It reminded us that power rarely announces itself loudly. It works through accounts, approvals, audits, and transitions. And unless those mechanisms are continuously questioned, explained, and challenged, they drift beyond public understanding. That is why this conversation matters. And that is why continued scrutiny matters even more. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to examine power, accountability, and the decisions that shape America's role in the world.